with PC. Those of you who are less familiar with PCEC, we are your local community conservation group with the support of 350 contributing members and over 4,000 local supporters. We work with people in our community to find common values and work towards safeguarding the land, water, wildlife, and communities in Park County. We acknowledge that Park County is the traditional homeland of the Cheyenne, Blackfeet, Sioux, Absaloka, and other indigenous nations who have stewarded this land for generations. We honor their ongoing connection to this place and pledge to work together for a sustainable future. Today, our conversation is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube for folks to share and view at your own convenience. We ask that you please keep your mics muted and save all questions until the end to be entered into the chat box. We'll try to adjust as many questions as time allows. I'm very excited to introduce Livingston's Bee City USA proclamation and the new Livingston Loves Bees initiative, but mostly I'm excited to introduce some important local community members that are working in many different capacities to support native pollinators and the wild habitats they thrive in. So last year, the city of Livingston became an official Bee City USA affiliate. This designation means that Livingston is committed to a number of actions to help protect pollinators, especially native bees. These commitments are to create and enhance pollinator habitat on public and private land by increasing the abundance of native plants and protecting nest sites. Also to reduce the use of pesticides, incorporate pollinator conscious practices into city policies and plans, and to host pollinator awareness events. Livingston is only the second city in Montana to achieve this affiliation, which is pretty cool. Our formal Parks and Trails Board championed this initiative, and one of those pollinator champions is here to speak with us today, Clay Bolt. Today we have Clay, the manager of pollinator conservation for World Wildlife Fund. He will share some fun facts about pollinators with a focus on native bees and some of the amazing species we have living among us here in Livingston. Michelle Toshack, Montana Bumblebee Atlas program lead for Xerces Society. She will share some volunteer opportunities to document bumblebees in Montana with the Bumblebee Atlas program. And then farmer Megan Randall, the program manager for Farm to School of Park County. She will share how Farm to School teaches about pollinators and what they do in their gardens to support pollinator populations. And before we fully get started and I pass it over to Clay, I just wanted to let folks know about some of the upcoming events and opportunities to help support pollinators through PCEC and some of our community partners. We have an Arbor Day celebration coming up at the Lincoln School with Livingston Loves Trees and Livingston Loves Bees. April 26th from 1 to 3. Come out and help us plant 2 trees and native plants in the boulevard. There will be opportunities to learn about best practices for tree planting in Livingston and to learn more about PCEC's community science opportunities through the new Wild Seed Initiative, aimed to enhance wild habitats by spreading the pollinator love with planting wild native wildflower seeds around the county. And then it's not too late to purchase native plants for your boulevard or lawn replacement projects at the Montana Freshwater Partners Native Plant Sale. It will be live until April 15th. There will be extra inventory available to purchase at the Native Plant Sale community event that will be held at the fairgrounds May 4th. 3 to 5, come anytime, and you can drop off soil samples, sign up for the Wild Seed Initiative, and learn more about pollinators in Montana. We will also have some community weed pools coming up, so I'm going to put a link to our events page in the chat here shortly if folks want to explore more of those opportunities we have coming. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Clay so he can share some cool, fun facts about bees.
Thanks so much, Bethany. And big thanks to PCEC for allowing me to be here today to talk to you about my favorite subject in the world, which are our amazing native bees that we have here in North America and also here in Livingston. And as Bethany mentioned, Livingston Loves Bees is a rebranding, if you will, of some of the native bee work that we've been doing here in town over the last few years. So moving forward, what was NOMA May and some of the other activities will now be part of Livingston Loves Bees, with the three main goals of planting native wildflowers, mowing less, and decreasing pesticides to support our native pollinators. So you can see the new signage and the new rebranding is a lot groovier than what we had in the past. So we're pretty excited about that. I always like to start my talks with reminding people that of the importance, not only the importance of pollinators and other insects, but just how ubiquitous small creatures are on our planet. And so we live in a place clearly where most people who come to Montana are here to see the large charismatic megafauna, but in fact, over 99% of life on Earth is smaller than your little finger. And the reason I point that out to you guys is because if you're doing things to help pollinators in your backyard, or if you are feeling down about the state of the world and feeling helpless in the face of climate change and those other things, one of the things that gives me hope is that even in my small backyard here in town, there are not just hundreds, but millions of organisms living within my care. So, you know, many species of ants, of bees, of butterflies, but also all of these different species that live in the soil, which benefit from the care that I provide. And so I think when you multiply that by the number of backyards, front yards, boulevards, public spaces in Montana, we are helping trillions of organisms to have a better life. And that in turn helps our water, it helps our native plants. Everything, you know, contributes to a better life for all of us here in Livingston. So today my main focus is going to be pollinators, and pollinators are super important for a number of reasons. They're often cited as being important because they do so much to help us produce our food that we eat, but they also are important for keeping wild plants thriving, which in turn provides habitat for birds, provides food for grazing animals, helps keep soil intact, sequesters water, keeps carbon in the soil. Pollinators do a lot to help our world that goes well beyond food. And there are a lot of different kinds of pollinators, obviously. Butterflies are some of the pollinators that people think of, but also flies. Flies are great pollinators, and many species of fly are really important pollinators. Of course, hummingbirds. This is not a Livingston native bird. This is down in the Dominican Republic, but there are a lot of different species of pollinating birds. Wasps are actually really important pollinators. Wasps do a lot of pollination, and surprisingly, as I'll get to, there's a really strong connection between wasps and bees. And if even ants are pollinators, this is a species of ant that's found more in the eastern United States called a winter ant, of Prenolepis imperus, and you can see all of the pollen on this ant's leg. But the superstar among pollinators are bees, because bees have evolved specifically, have very unique adaptations to making them superstar pollinators. And you can see on this photo of a longhorn bee on a sunflower here in my backyard, just the amount of pollen that has attached itself to the bee's body. And bees have evolved these specialized hairs that are feathered, and those feathered or scopal hairs actually hold a static charge. So when a bee lands on a flower, the pollen actually can leap onto the bee's body, which I just find to be really amazing. So that's one of the reasons that bees are such good pollinators. And bees are not only visiting plants for the nectar, but the pollen is used to feed their young. And so they're really invested in not only collecting nectar, which is sort of their flight fuel, but they're also invested in collecting as much of that pollen as they can to bring back to feed their young. And so as they move from flower to flower, they're transporting that pollen as well. And some of it falls onto a neighboring plant, and then that's how a new baby flower is born. So what is a bee? I think it's important sort of define that because there are a lot of insects that look like bees, and we often are confused about, am I looking at a bee or is this something else? So bees are actually relatives of some insects that we're familiar with. They're relatives of ants. They're relatives of sawflies, and sawflies are the oldest ancestor of all of these. Sawflies look a little bit wasp-like, but their young look very similar to caterpillars. So we'll see those on our plants sometimes. And so ants, wasp, and bees all share the common ancestor of sawflies. And so bees evolved from a certain group of wasp that are generally predatory, but those wasps ultimately began to collect some pollen, which led to the evolution of bees. So you could essentially say that bees are vegetarian wasp, or as some people call them, hippie wasp, which maybe goes pretty good with our new branding for Livingston Loves Bees. Now, even among experts, sometimes people get confused. This is a pretty famous book, Bees of the World. And I always ask people, how many bees are on the cover of this book? Well, the answer is one, and it's right here in the first letter of this word. This is actually a fly on the cover of this book. I'm not sure how that exactly happened, but anyway, someone probably got in trouble. But it's easy to confuse bees and wasps because bees are insects which the female bees can sting, and so a lot of insects want to look like bees for their own protection. But this, on the left here, you'll see this hoverfly species, which looks very much like a red-belted bumblebee. I actually photographed this up at Livingston Peak, this hoverfly on top, but you can see how perfectly it matches the coloration of the bee below. Here's another example from the tropics. This is a type of fly that mimics an orchid bee. So there is this attempt by a lot of insects to look like bees. But one of the things you can think about with flies is flies only have two wings that you can see. They have these small wings that are greatly reduced in size called halteres. But you can't see it on this photo, but bees have four wings. And there's different ways in terms of the way that their legs look, their faces. You can see these huge compound eyes on a fly. So there's some differences that once you start looking closely, you might be able to tease apart the difference. But the good news is both of these insects are pollinators. They're just pollinating in different ways. There are also types of insects that mimic bees because they like to eat bees. So this is a robber fly. Here are those reduced wings. You can see this little tiny cream-colored structure. That's basically the back wing that has reduced in size through evolution. But it mimics bumblebees so that it can trick them into getting close enough so that they could eat the bumblebees. But all of these species play important roles in the ecosystem. Now, when many people think of bees, we have this sort of cartoonish idea about what a bee is. And oftentimes our mind goes to honeybees because we like to eat honey. There's research that shows that honey was really important to the evolution of mankind's giant brain because it provides a lot of nutrients that can allow us to, think and be these complex organisms. But the truth is that honeybees, as much as we love them, are not native to North America. They were introduced in the 1600s along with cows and chickens and all of our other domesticated species. And despite what we may read, despite some of the challenges that honeybees face, honeybees are not in trouble. Honeybees are domesticated species, which, like a cow or a chicken, can be bred in greater numbers as needed. So there is some die-off of honeybees, but that has a lot more to do with pesticides, with the way that we ship honeybees around in their colonies and other stressors that cause the species to have trouble sometimes. But just to stress that if you're considering doing something to help native bees, planting wildflowers, avoiding pesticides, and those kinds of things are actually more beneficial for bees than keeping a box of bees in your backyard because again, as much as we love honeybees, they do compete with native species when they're in the environment. Worldwide, there are 20,000 species of bee in the world, and this was something that blew my mind because I had no idea. When I first started studying bees 12 or 13 years ago, I knew there were bumblebees, I knew there were honeybees and sweat bees, but I didn't realize that there was this great diversity. This was actually an old photo of mine. It was the first photo I took where I realized, wow, there are native bees, and this led me on this journey to learn more about native species. So our native species are oftentimes quite small. We might see them flying around and think, is that a gnat or a mosquito or something? But turns out that there are some really tiny bees in the world. Here's an example from my backyard here in Livingston. This is in an apple tree. This is a type of mason bee. And so you can see just how small the hole is in this old piece of wood. So this is an example for one of the benefits of leaving some standing wood or canes or those kinds of things in your yard, because a lot of our native species reuse these materials once they're no longer alive or they're dying. There are also some really huge bees in the world. So I was privileged to rediscover the world's largest bee in 2019 in a remote part of Indonesia called um, um, Halmahera. And this bee had not been seen for a really long time, but the female from head to tail is larger than my thumb. And this is how large she is compared to a honeybee. So, you know, there are some really amazing differences in size. There are amazing differences in color. This is an orchid bee down in Colombia that I photographed last year. There are these strange bees that have evolved to live in deserts. This is in the Atacama Desert down in northern Chile that has evolved this long snout, if you will, to collect floral oils from flowers that grow in desert areas. There are bees that fly at night. There are blue bees with scales on their body, like butterfly wings. There are other types of native bees that produce honey. They're called stingless bees that are found from Mexico south into South America, more of the tropical regions of South America. There are also stingless bees in Africa and Australia that produce really good honey in long-lived colonies that are found in the wild, but also have been domesticated as well. Now, here in North America, we have 4,000 species of native bee, and the number continues to rise as we discover many new species. For example, Montana is still a very unexplored place when it comes to learning about native bees. And people like Casey Delphia at Montana State are doing a lot of really interesting work discovering new bees in places that haven't been looked at, like the Pryors, for example. There's a lot of species that have been found there, maybe not necessarily new to science always, but new to the state of Montana. And Montana is actually a state with a lot of bee richness, but the eastern side of the state, for example, is still kind of a black hole in terms of what we know. And our native bees come in so many different colors, shapes, forms. They have different ways of living in the world, different functions. It's just really extraordinary. And if you're like me, once you start learning about native bees, you become fascinated with just, I'm always delighted. Every year I see something new in my garden that I've never seen before, because as I plant native wildflowers, new bees show up. And it's just a nonstop fun ride for me to see what will show up in my garden. There are bees that specialize in pollinating certain crops. For example, there are squash bees that are better at pollinating squash than honeybees because they sleep in the blossoms at night. There are many small bees, like this is a bee that's actually considered to be a sweat bee, but it is smaller than a grain of rice. And this is one of the types of bees called Hylaeus that we have lots of these here in Livingston. These are some of our early spring bees. But also we have specialized bees. So like I started planting sunflowers in my garden, and the year before last, I had sunflower mining bees show up later in the summer. They only visit sunflowers. Where they came from, I don't know, but I was happy that they were here. And they often will sleep on the flowers at night, which is what's happening here. We just have a tremendous diversity of bees here in our little community, which is something that I really love. Up on the hill, we have death camas, and also near Livingston Peak, there's a species of plant called death camas, which is very, very toxic. And most species of pollinator can't even drink the nectar, eat the pollen, because it would kill them. But there's a specialized type of bee called a death camas mining bee that comes out at the same time that these flowers bloom. It only feeds on the death camas and is the primary pollinator along with a fly for the species. So there's so much diversification and interesting things happening. This is a type of leafcutter bee. This is a male, and he has these really fuzzy front legs. And the males use those to cover the eyes of the female when they're mating, so that in case the female sees a better looking male fly past and she's deciding that she doesn't like what's going on. So there are all these weird, amazing things that happen with insects that are super exciting. And again, just to give you a sense of scale, this is a columbine in my front garden, and this is a tiny sweat bee that was probably about half the size of a grain of rice sitting on that flower petal there. So tremendous diversity of sizes, colors like this mason bee. But the group that I'm most excited about, the group that I love the most are bumblebees. Montana actually has more species of bumblebee than any other state in the country, because bumblebees like cool weather. They like a lot of elevation. They do really well in mountains. There's 250 known species worldwide. The number in the US has actually increased past 42. I think it's around 45. Michelle can correct me on that if I'm mistaken. And our native species, our bumblebee, are some of our most important pollinators because they have all of these specialized adaptations for flying early in the morning. They can warm their bodies up by unhinging their wings from their flight muscles. They do a thing called buzz pollination or sonication, where they, in the same way, they can unhinge those wings from the flight muscles and vibrate their bodies at a middle C, like a tuning fork, which causes pollen to fall out of certain plants like tomatoes or blueberries. So oftentimes if you hear a bumblebee on a plant and you hear it, you might think, oh, it's angry, but it's sonicating. It's using sound to capture that pollen. So you can see that bumblebees are just super fuzzy little guys and gals. This is a male visiting a tansy, which is a non-native plant, but it's a great way to just show you how furry bumblebees are. And bumblebees on their back leg, again, being a male, it doesn't quite have the structure. They have this large patch on their back leg called a corbicula or a pollen basket. And that's where you'll see bumblebees flying around and honeybees with these globs of pollen and nectar stuck together. And that's where they carry them. Bumblebees evolved in the Himalayas. And so that's one of the reasons that they love living in Montana, because we have these mountainous environments with these alpine habitats where bees thrive. So you can find bees from the grasslands, these bumblebees, all the way up to the tip of the bear tooths, basically. They do well in lots of different types of habitats. But we have specialist bees. So in the bear tooths, for example, there are species that are found up there that are not found anywhere else in Montana. And then you get more into the grasslands and you have grassland specialists. So they fill lots of different niches. And just give you an example of some of the alpine bumblebees that you might see in various places. A couple of these are Alaskan specialists, but we have quite a lot of these. Like I photographed this one in the top right in Sacagawea. It's a bumblebee that has recently been split into 3 different species. Some of them are quite large, some of them are small, but they all kind of have this bumblebee look. And then here on the bottom left, I'll talk about this more in a little bit, is the western bumblebee, or Bombus occidentalis, which is a species of concern that has been proposed for listing. And it's something we should be very proud of having in our little town because it's not doing well in so many other places. But again, bumblebees can fly in mountain storms. They also do quite well around people, so they're found in our cities. They're fairly adaptable if we give them a place to live. And they thrive when there are native wildflowers to feed upon, there are places to nest, and there's a pesticide-free environment. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about bees is that, and insects in general, is that they really can respond very quickly if we give them half a chance. The bad news is that 1 out of every 4 species of bumblebee in North America is considered endangered. So I think that the cool thing about an initiative like Livingston Loves Bees is that we can truly make a difference in the life of these insects by providing the things that they need. The rusty patch bumblebee was the first species that was listed. I was involved in that process several years ago, and now we have the western bumblebee. This is in my backyard on 8th Street, visiting a plum flower. And it's a really easy bumblebee to tell apart from the others because when you see it in the wild, it looks more cream here because it's against a pure white background. But when you see it in the wild, it has a pure, like very bright white butt, and the other bees don't have that. So it's easy to tell apart from that. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Michelle, who's going to tell you more about some of the cool things you can do to help bumblebees here in Montana. Michelle?
Awesome. Thank you, Clay. Loved all those photos. They were absolutely stunning. And Yeah, I just really appreciate that you are the Bumblebee hype person because we get to talk more about bumblebees. So let me just share my screen. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
All right, let me get in presentation mode here. Okay, awesome. So I just wanted to share with you all an opportunity to learn more about bumblebees and get involved in bumblebees here in Montana as part of a community science program. So first I wanted to share kind of how it all got started with me chasing pollinators. So this is a photo taken right out of college. I was working on a butterfly diversity study. So this is called the old head in the net method. So if you want to get really up close and personal with pollinators, highly recommend this method. Also, if there happen to be mosquitoes in the area, it will also keep the mosquitoes away. So win-win. So my background is really with community science and butterflies. Most recently, I worked throughout Montana and the Mountain West to document high elevation species of butterflies. My graduate work was with bumblebees and bumblebee diversity. So that brought me to Xerces to start working on this bumblebee atlas. So the Bumblebee Atlas is a collaborative project to track and conserve bumblebees. So Montana and the Rocky Mountains are completely new this year. We're really excited to have the Atlas running in 20 states, coast to coast. Xerces is a science-based organization with a mission to conserve invertebrates and their habitats. We run a number of pollinator conservation programs, including Bee City USA. We also work with a lot of farmers and ranchers for pollinator habitat, as well as conserving threatened species. So scientists and agencies are really limited in the amount of data that they can collect. However, we all carry these lovely little data collection devices and cameras in our pockets, which enables collecting mass amounts of data at a rapid pace. So establishing these baseline data sets is really important to monitor population changes, understand distribution of species, and fill in data gaps regarding habitat associations and floral preferences. We can start to use this information to begin forming recommendations to conserve bumblebees. So a good example of how community science is effective is documenting the Western bumblebee throughout the Pacific Northwest in the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, which started in 2018. And as Clay mentioned, this Western bumblebee is experiencing decline, especially on the West Coast. And volunteers really rallied together to contribute a number of observations. So all of these observations circled in red are part of the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas. So this distribution was relatively unknown before this Atlas project started, and these areas in red were contributions. So if you go over to Montana, you can see that we have a lot of work to do. Western bumblebees are quite common, like the photos that Clay showed. We have them right here in Livingston and throughout Montana. We just don't have a lot of documentation. So hopefully that's where you come in to help fill in some of those data gaps. And just to zoom out a little bit, if you look at all of the bumblebee observations submitted through Bumblebee Watch, this map shows the records that are kind of in the lighter scale. These are less observations. The darker the color, the more observations. So Montana just doesn't have a lot of information, and we really have a lot of work to do to fill in some data. In general, Montana is one of the least studied areas in regards to bee species and distribution. There's just a lot of sparsely populated areas in Montana that are often just really hard to access. Many of these records in eastern Montana are along roadways. There's just large data gaps in private land and checkerboarded public land. So as we all know, Montana is a super special place to live. This photo I took up North Fork of Deep Creek last summer. Just wildflowers were popping, like the color and like also the bumblebees in that meadow were just absolutely stunning. So there's many places like this that we like to hang out and that bumblebees like to hang out as well. We know that Montana is home to at least 28 bumblebee species. This is based on the work that Amy Dolan and her colleagues did, published in 2017. And as Clay mentioned, this is the highest diversity of bumblebees in the US. So we have a number of different ecosystems that we also love to enjoy recreating in. We have alpine zones, grasslands, river corridors, all of these really incredible places. Montana is a very unique area for looking at bumblebees because we're at this junction between eastern US species and western US species. We have our alpine areas are connected all the way to the Arctic through Canada to the north and also connected to the desert south. So because of this, it's quite likely that we will be detecting new bumblebees in the state through this Montana Bumblebee Atlas project. So what does a day in the life of a community scientist look like? This project is really a great way to get outside, meet other people, and learn more about bumblebees. So these photos show some of the other Atlas projects throughout the US, a lot of beautiful areas spent outdoors, and a lot of posing with insect nets because it just happens that way. So the project kicks off in June. This illustration here shows the bumblebee life cycle. We're really interested in surveying female worker bees during their peak season. And if you're like me and enjoy being outside in fair weather, then this is the project for you. Optimal conditions for surveying include warm weather, minimal wind, and no rain. And I'll be hosting a number of online and in-person events throughout the summer here in Livingston and then also throughout Paradise Valley. So I hope that you can join me for some of those. Once volunteers are trained, then kind of you're off on your own to conduct your own surveys. We ask that people commit to at least 2 surveys anywhere between June and September. And now I just want to share with you kind of some different ways to get involved. There's some different survey types that people can choose from. So point surveys are the most popular and preferred survey type. And what this looks like is that you'll kind of adopt an area that you want to work in. And within that grid, you'll select an area that's 1 hectare. And if you think about a standard size of a track and the inside of that track space, that is about 1 hectare. So this is something that you could easily do within parks that we have in Livingston or out in natural areas when you're out on your hikes. And then when you're at the site, we request that people spend 45 person minutes in the area catching bumblebees. And if you split this between multiple people, so let's say you have 3 people who want to go out, then it's actually only 15 minutes. So it's not a huge time requirement to go and look for bumblebees. So basically what this looks like is that it's really fun chasing bumblebees, getting them in the net, putting them into a little vial, plopping them into a cooler, and then taking high quality photographs of these bees. So for those of you who are concerned about handling and photographing bees, rest assured when you put them on ice, they are completely still. There is no way that they can sting you. It's also a really unique opportunity to get so up close and personal with these insects. There's also a roadside survey that you can do. So this is a really good option if there's issues with land ownership, permissions, etc. And so you select a 10-mile stretch of road, and then at 5 locations, you spend 15 minutes collecting data on bumblebees. This is something that it's not our top choice for data collection because a lot of these roadsides tend to have non-native species of flowers. There's also safety concerns, of course. The other option is just an incidental survey. So if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, the whole community science thing isn't for me, I like to do my own thing during the summers, I completely understand. But perhaps you see a bumblebee in your backyard and you want to take a picture of it. And so Bumblebee Watch is an app that you can download on your phone. All you have to do is take a photo of that bee and then upload it in the app. This can be done anywhere. We just need those high quality photos. We're especially interested in this Western bumblebee. So if you see that white butt flying around and you can take a picture of it, you don't have to be involved in the Bumblebee Atlas to submit that to Bumblebee Watch. So I hope that I've convinced you how fun and exciting catching bumblebees is. This is something I really hope that you will join me for one of the events this summer. So just had to share this last photo with you because chasing bumblebees is a lot more fun if you wear bright and sparkly colors. But really hope to see you out one of the workshops this summer. So if you want to learn more, you can visit bumblebeeatlas.org. Drop me a line. My email address is listed here, and I hope to see you this summer. Thank you. So now I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to Megan Randall from Farm to School.
Hi, everyone. I will share my screen in just a moment. I'm going to reorient myself because I'm in the greenhouse and the sun has changed and I can tell I'm like really backlit. So does that show up fine for everybody? Think.
No, I'm not seeing
Megan.
it.
I can see Megan. I don't see your screen yet, Megan.
Yep. Sorry. Okay. We're looking good now?
Yes.
Thanks. I'm so excited, Clay. I'm really into this sonicating that bees do. I can't wait to tell third graders about that.
Cool.
Yeah, how fun. So I'm Megan Randall. I'm the garden manager for Farm to School of Park County. I am not a bee or pollinator expert, but I think I am kind of an expert in getting kids excited about the outdoors and gardening and observing in the garden. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Farm to School is doing to support pollinators. I think I want you guys to leave with knowing that the Bee City initiative is not coming from nowhere. Like, we've laid some groundwork with kids and they're excited about pollinators. So Farm to School of Park County, I won't spend too much time, but we are a nonprofit that is guiding schools and communities in building a prosperous local food culture that places healthy food on the plates and in the minds of all Park County children and their families. So that looks like managing school gardens, growing food for school meals, and teaching kids about where their food comes from. And pollinators are a really important part of where our food comes from. So I'll talk a little bit about how we teach about pollinators in the classroom first. So supporting pollinators in the classroom. We teach our students to be respectful of all living things in the garden, and in particular, they learn the importance of pollinators. So in our lessons, we talk about who pollinates, kids are super excited about honeybees. They are awesome and we love honey. So I like to make sure to also include lessons about native bees and those other bee species that we want to support. So we learn about who pollinates. We learn about how we can provide good habitat for pollinators in our gardens. We talk about how we can also provide food for pollinators in the gardens. And we also teach about the benefits of including native plants in the gardens, especially in terms of how they support native species. I'm going to share some pictures of what that looks like. So here's a third grader. I know that like fruit bats and saguaro are not native to Livingston, but that's just one of many kind of images we use. So we are teaching about all the different pollinators, and they were particularly learning about how certain pollinators are adapted to pollinate certain plants, or on the other way, how certain plants have adapted to attract certain pollinators. So that bat pollinates the saguaro cactus, but there's lots of other examples that we are learning about in that lesson. We again talk about providing habitat for pollinators in the gardens. And so just like Clay talked about, that can look like mowing less, leaving debris, leaving wood, like habitat in that way. We also, again, with third graders, created this nest box for native bee species. We learned particularly about leafcutter and mason bees. This is new. I've never actually had an insect box, so I'm excited to see if we get action in there. But again, a lot of what I think is important is certainly if we can provide a home for bees in our gardens, that's wonderful. But if we get kids excited about that and valuing that, I think that's also really important. And of course, we include a lot of flowers in our gardens. So students help plant flowers and they know that that is done partly to benefit pollinators, and we encourage them to plant flowers at home. So kids were sent home, we planted flowers in the garden and they were sent home with their little seed balls and seed packets that they could plant at home. And then we also love to talk about including native plant species in our garden. So this is fifth graders who are observing some native plants and learning about those benefits. And then of course, the next step was to plant those guys in the garden. So we do, in every garden we manage, we include at least some native species. This photograph is from the East Side School Garden, and there's a native plant zone in that garden that we're working on, populating just with native plant species. And I just love this picture. Picture's worth, 1,000 words. I know it's not a bee, but I do feel like this just sums up what we're really trying to do. Because when I look at this picture, I took this in a school garden, I see a student who is being not grabbing that sphinx moth, giving it a little bit of space, being respectful, being excited. We saw this moth last September, and the class that was in the garden when that moth was there, like we still talk about it. It's like it was the event of the year. And that I was just like so excited to see more diverse species in the gardens. And it was really cool that students got a chance to observe that. So there's our sphinx moth pollinating a zinnia that we planted. So of course, outside the classrooms, we also are doing our best to support pollinators in our gardens. And we're doing that in a way that, we keep our gardens productive. We want to grow a lot of food, but also making them really friendly for pollinators. So for us, mainly that means planting flowers that have bloom times throughout the whole season. Bees wake up in the spring and we want to have food for them in the spring all the way through the fall. So we try and have blooms throughout the whole season. We never spray chemicals that can harm pollinators. And we use integrated pest management, which can mean a lot of different things. A couple examples of what I'm thinking of in terms of integrated pest management in our gardens is, for example, making our gardens, like we want our gardens to be really friendly for birds too. Partly because birds are awesome, but if we're inviting birds into our garden, they will also eat some of the insects that are pests. And then we're not spraying for those insects, which can, again, harm other insect populations. So that's a good example. We want birds in the garden to eat insects. We also purchase beneficial insect eggs and release them in our gardens. My favorite is the green lacewing that eats aphids. So we rely on those pretty strongly. So yeah, we'll release those in the garden. But to me, again, integrated pest management can mean lots of different things. But in our gardens, it's valuing diversity and inviting beneficial insects, beneficial species into our gardens to help manage pests. We also certify, our biggest garden is downtown at the Lincoln School, and we certified that garden as certified wildlife habitat through the National Wildlife Federation, and you can certify your own habitat. It was a really fun process to go through with students. They made the observations and they just decided whether or not they thought our habitat could be certified, and then we went through the process. So we're really excited that our habitat is certified. And that again ties a lot into the integrated pest management. If we have habitat that supports wildlife, we're inviting those birds and those beneficial insects into our gardens. I'm gonna show you some pictures. So these are all flowers from our gardens. I took those like all throughout the season. Several of these species are native. They're not all native, but they bloom throughout the season. So supporting pollinators is fun and beautiful because look at those. And we've even got a bee on one of those flowers. That's our certified wildlife habitat at the Lincoln School farm. And here's a great, I just thought this was a great picture to kind of represent that integrated pest management. That's a ladybug. Ladybugs in their adult and larval stage also eat aphids, and we made a great habitat for ladybugs, and we didn't release them or anything. They showed up and ate a bunch of aphids, and we were happy to provide them habitat. And then this last picture, I just wanted to include, I think this really really shows what a diverse garden can look like. So this is a Lincoln School farm. We grow about 3,000 pounds of food there every year. But looking at this, you can tell, like, I can see a bunch of different, there's sunflowers in the background, calendula closer, there's fruit trees and squash. Like, I can see all of that happening. And so that's a habitat that can support lots of different species, hopefully lots of native pollinators, but also, again, inviting in those beneficial species as well. That is pretty much what I had. I know that was kind of short and sweet, but that's what Farm to School is doing to support pollinators in the classrooms and gardens. I left time for questions, but it sounded like, Bethany, do you want me to send it back to you and we'll wrap up at the very end with questions?
Well, I think that is a great segue into questions and folks to type their questions into the chat. If you also want to raise your hand, we can try to call on you if we see that.
Oh, sorry, can I add one thing?
Please do.
I was thinking, it was so cool to hear about Michelle's opportunities for citizen science. If anybody is interested in an incidental survey that you want to carry out at the Lincoln School, I'm so interested to know more about the species that we have there. You're welcome to do that anytime, but I'll put my email in the chat, like if you want to talk to me about that, but that would be really fun. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is that? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
That's good.
I'll be popping by there, Megan.
Great. That'd be so cool.
Well, and that leads to a question I had that maybe some other folks are interested is how do you sign up to do those surveys, Michelle? Is there a link or some way for us to sign up for those initiatives?
Yeah, so it's through the Bumblebee Atlas. So let me just drop this in the chat, and then I'll also put my email in here as well. But that's something that I think there's a lot of ways to get involved, and I think through Livingston Loves Bees, I'll be doing a lot of like local Livingston events, probably do something at Sacagawea, something close by that everyone, it's a easy close by area that a lot of people could attend, and then do one later in the summer that'll be more of a hike in Paradise Valley, try to get into some of those higher wildflower zones. So we'll definitely keep everyone posted, and once I get some dates on the calendar.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, let's see. I have a question here. What are the biggest threats to bees in Livingston? Is mosquito spraying a threat?
Should I take that?
That sounds great.
So the biggest threats, I think it really comes down to a couple of different things. One being the availability of food, because like us, bees need a balanced diet throughout the season. So there are bees, as I mentioned earlier, that come out in early spring. So they really need those early spring wildflowers. And then there are bees that come out at the end of the season. And so that's why it's important to always, if you're trying to help pollinators in your garden, to plant a diversity of plants that bloom from early spring all the way into fall. And those native plants are ideal because many of those bees that live in this area have specialized relationships. Many are generalists, but then they're like the sunflower bee that require those native species. So that is one of the biggest threats, just the lack of availability of food, but also places to nest. So one of the reasons that we suggest mowing less and allowing your garden to be a little wilder is because bees need a place to nest. And when I say that, I don't mean some giant colony that will be in your yard and you have to worry about being stung. Most bees are solitary. They're very small. They have they're not going to swarm. They just need places to nest that are not disturbed as much as like a lawn where you're like mowing it all the time. Mosquito spraying is a problem for bees, and the reason why is, if you look on the county website, you can see the kinds of sprays that they're using. Those sprays are adulticide sprays for mosquitoes. And really, the most effective way to get rid of mosquitoes, if you don't want them, is to remove standing water. So like old buckets, tires, those kinds of things. Those are where those mosquitoes are nesting and being raised, I should say. And so really the alternative to spraying that works better is to use, there are these biocontrol floats. Dumping out water is ideal, the first thing to do. But then there are these biocontrol floats that you can put in like your goldfish pond or something like that, that will help get rid of those larvae in a way that's not harmful. The reason I say that is because, like, if you read the Park County site, it says they're spraying adulticides, which doesn't harm bees because bees are in their nest. But that's only referring to honeybees, because honeybees return to the nest at night. But many of our native bees, including many bumblebees, will sleep on flowers at night. And so they're getting doused with those chemicals while they're sleeping. And I think too, those sprays are not going to be going away by the next day. So if they're coming out early in the morning and they sprayed at night, they're coming in contact with those sprays, not to mention how those sprays can harm insects that feed our trout, for example, that we love here in town. And those can also impact birds and so on and so forth. So really trying to avoid spraying is really, really helpful for bees and lots of other organisms.
Yeah, thank you, Clay. I really appreciate, thinking of those alternative methods as well, and the non-harmful ways that you can treat mosquitoes if they're an issue for you. There was another question added about the treatment of noxious weeds with herbicides. So I think kind of similar in that vein. Do you or anyone else have any thoughts on that? Is it a similar idea as the mosquito spraying as far as threats to bees?
Yeah, I think it's really similar to what Clay said. I think the only thing that I'd like to add is just that for noxious weeds, there can be spot applications and things that are done in a way to try to minimize those impacts. But this isn't something that should be done like on a home garden scale. I think home garden scale, there's some other options that people can do to fight weeds, like using mulch, being very diligent. Vinegar works great as a weed killer, and some other things that are just a little less harmful for pollinators.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question I did receive via email for someone who wasn't able to attend that was also along the realm of noxious weeds. And that's a lot of what my work is with PCEC. So someone asked about knapweed. And so I'm curious what you all think, but my thoughts about, so knapweed is an attractant to bees. Bees really love to feed on the nectar and pollen of knapweed. But the thought for me is this: although they love the knapweed outcompetes a lot of the other beneficial food for bees and disrupts that native system, having many unintended consequences. Knapweed puts a chemical into the soil that prevents anything other than knapweed growing there. So in my mind, it's similar, or like what Michelle is saying, of that integrated management, try to minimize knapweed. I think it's a fine line to be met between applying herbicide, when is it necessary, when is the knapweed an issue. But definitely curious what the bee experts think about knapweed.
Well, I would just say I've read papers that say that, while insects are often, attracted to non-native species, there is some research that shows that certain species are not as beneficial. But there's also research that shows that because of, I guess, the relentlessness of these native species and their introduction when they come into an environment and how they spread so quickly, that they pull pollinators away from the native species for a variety of reasons. And so when you think about sort of the ripples that can take place after those insects visit these noxious weeds, which in turn harms the native vegetation, which then, if that goes away, leaves more room for spreading. It may not be harming the bee in the moment, but it's harming the bee long-term and future generations of the bees and other pollinators.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good point. We are getting low on time. I see one more question, so let's go ahead and answer that. So do fly predator insects harm bees? These are insects that feast on eggs before they hatch.
Sheldon, you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
I'm going to let you take this one. It's a fun question.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. So I guess there's different ways of looking at things. In the circle of life, if you will, in our gardens, there are bees that are cuckoo species on other bees. So like bees can harm bees. Spiders will eat bees. Bees are, doing their thing, and there's lots of different things that can sort of impact bees. But those, for example, a bee fly is an example of an insect that flicks its eggs into the nest of native ground nesting bees. But that is not impacting bees on a scale that's harmful. It's just part of the natural cycle, because those flies also pollinate. They do other things. Birds eat bees, for example. Like I have photos of warblers with bees in their mouth or their beaks. And so, I think that we could really get into a slippery slope if we try to control the natural functions of nature. There are much bigger threats to bees than sort of these natural parasites, these naturally occurring predatory species. Because I guess you could think of it as those species have co-evolved together for millions of years, and they have developed mechanisms to outcompete one another. There are always rises and falls in population. And an example would be, when the rabbit population booms, then you have a boom of raptors that are feeding on those. And then when the rabbit population drops, the same thing happens to those predatory animals that prey on rabbits. And the same goes for insects. They have these rises and falls that are natural. But if we come in and we try to eliminate one species that is existing, what happens is, just in the same way that the weeds do, other species can come in and fill that niche. And so it's better just to try to provide a habitat that allows for that balance to exist than worrying about, is one naturally occurring species harming another, I guess. I feel like I said that in a mush mouth kind of way, but hopefully that came through.
It did, and I think these are all really important things to think about. It's a very complicated system, and once you start moving pieces around, it gets more complicated. Well, it is 1 o'clock. I appreciate everyone for taking time to join us. I appreciate our guest who spoke. I'm very excited to be working with and in proximity with you all. This is all very exciting to have Livingston Loves Bees come into full fruition. And so really looking forward to more outreach opportunities with you all. And yeah, please stay posted on more events we have coming. And thank you very much. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.